Guys, it's been the craziest morning. Literally, I went to take Thor and Ruby on their walk, and as Thor was going to pee on a tree, Ruby walked right in the way. So, what do you infer happened? That's right, he peed all over her. So, I had to give her a quick little bath, but now I'm back and ready. So, yesterday, I asked you guys about that quote from The Wild Robot that said, out of ugliness can come beauty. So, you did such a nice job understanding that from like that dark winter or from death comes some beautiful things, as they described in the book. And then it was really cool to see your pictures of spring and how beautiful the island looked after that really, really hard winter. Today we're going to pick up on chapter 60 called The Fish. Help! Help! He's got my tail! Paddler was splashing and screaming in the pond. Mr. and Mrs. Beaver were nowhere to be seen, so Roz picked up a fallen tree branch and stomped into the shallows. Grab onto this, she said as she reached out with the branch. Paddler grabbed it with his big teeth, and the robot lifted him up out of the water. And there, hanging from the young beaver's tail, was Rockmouth, the grumpy old pikefish. In one quick movement, Roz pulled the branch and gripped the fish with her two hands. Paddler flopped into the water, where his parents appeared. What is wrong with you, Rockmouth? Mrs. Beaver dragged her son away. You've always been a nuisance, but this time you've gone too far. Do us all a favor, Roz, and toss him to the vultures. I cannot do that, said the robot, but I might be able to help. Roz placed Rockmouth in a deep puddle near the pond where he couldn't swim away. Then she waited for the fish to explain himself. Fish aren't very talkative, especially grumpy fish like Rockmouth. But eventually he opened up to the robot, and before long she was waving for the beavers to come join. Rockmouth used to live in the river, said Roz, as the beavers shuffled over, but you trapped him here when you built the dam. He's been angry about it ever since. That doesn't give him the right to attack my son, hollered Mr. Beaver. It most certainly does not, hollered Mrs. Beaver. I'd be upset too, said Paddler softly. I'd hate to be kept away from my home. Mr. Rockmouth, you should have said something sooner. The fish looked up from the puddle and with a frustrated expression that meant, I tried, but no one was listening. Well, the situation had to be remedied, and you can guess who rose to the occasion. Roz was determined to get Rockmouth back to his home. After she explored the nearby waters, it became clear that she would have to carry this pikefish through the forest and across the great meadow to the nearest bend in the river. I need a large container, said Roz to the beavers, something I can fill with water so Rockmouth can breathe while I carry him home. I could make it myself, but I thought you'd like to help. It couldn't have been easy to overcome her anger with Rockmouth, but after Mrs. Beaver had a chance to cool off, she finally came around. I suppose we're partly to blame for this whole situation, she muttered. Then the beavers did the right thing, and together they carved out a wooden barrel for the fish. Here you go. Mrs. Beaver rolled the barrel over to the puddle, where the robot and the fish were waiting. This should work nicely, Rockmouth. I hope you're happy back in the river. Rockmouth just flicked his tail in a way that meant, will someone please take me home now? Roz filled the barrel with water and a grumpy fish, and they were off. She carried Rockmouth through the forest, across the meadow, until she was standing on the riverbank. Welcome home, said the robot. Then she tipped the barrel, and the fish plunked into the river. Rockmouth's face poked above the surface. He flashed a big, toothy grin, and he quickly swam away. So Rockmouth isn't in his natural home, right? He's upset. And that's kind of foreshadowing. So this is a big, fancy, upper grade, older word, but I'm going to teach you now. It's called foreshadowing because in the future, in this story, we're going to talk more about Roz and how she's not really in her proper home, right? She is a robot on an island. She's not really belonging there, even though she's come so far and made all these friends. But it's going to come into play later where this is not really her home. So Rockmouth is used for foreshadowing, telling us kind of what's to come with Roz. Fancy word. Go impress your friends. All right, chapter 61. The Robot Stories. The story of how Roz helped Rockmouth spread by the river and across the land, and it was soon followed by other robot stories. There were stories of Roz growing gardens in dry, barren places. There were stories of Roz nursing sick animals back to health. There were stories of Roz creating ropes and wheels and tools for helping her friends. But most of the news stories were about the robot's wildness. You see, Roz had noticed that the wilder she acted, the more the animals liked her. And so she barked with foxes and sang with birds and hissed with snakes. She romped with weasels, she sunbathed with lizards, she leaped with deer. The spring was a very wild time for our robot. Chapter 62, The Return. It was a quiet afternoon on the pond, but the quiet was gradually being overtaken by the sounds not heard around there for many months. The sounds grew louder and louder, and then a flock of geese appeared above the trees. Honk, honk, honk! Most flocks of geese move lazily through the sky and trail off in wobbly lines, but not this one. This flock was fast, and it flew in a perfect V formation. It was led by a small but graceful goose. The flock flew once around the pond before gliding down and gently splashing into the water. The geese gathered in a tight group in the middle of the pond. They floated there for a while, softly honking to one another. And then the leader broke away from the others. He swam straight toward the nest, waddled into the garden, and fluttered up to his mother's shoulder. "Welcome home, son," said Roz. "It's good to be back, Ma," said Bright Bill. So that's interesting. They said he's the leader in the V formation, and normally that's the strongest flyer. So I'm wondering what happened on their journey. That makes me think something must have happened. Here he is. Still little and cute. Chapter 63, The Journey. After months of separation, Roz and Bright Bill, mother and son, were together again, and they had so much catching up to do. They went into the nest and the robot built a fire. Then the goose gazed into the flames and told the story of his winter. This is what he said. "We spent the whole first day of our migration flying over the ocean. It seemed like the ocean would go on forever. But just when the flock was getting tired, Longneck pointed at some tiny islands on the horizon. We flew down to one of them and ate dune grass and rested our wings. After a few days of hopping from island to island, we reached the mainland and continued over fields and forests. And then the snow began to fall." So we know that the snow was harsh on the island, so I wonder how harsh it was for the geese. "I never seen snow before, and at first I thought it was beautiful, but it just kept coming. The others explained that the snow was early and that we were never supposed to see it. But there it was, piling up around us as we tried to sleep at night. Longneck worried that the weakest geese wouldn't survive, and he was right. We lost old Widefoot to that very first storm. We tried to fly around the snowy weather, but we got completely lost, and the weather became worse. Lakes and ponds and rivers were freezing over. We couldn't find food or water, so we ate snow, but it only made us colder. We had trouble cleaning ourselves, and our feathers became dirty and heavy. The flock was in bad shape, but Longneck kept us moving. 'We are geese,' he squawked, 'and geese keep going.' One day, we were struggling through a snow shower when we saw something called a farm. It had perfectly square fields and enormous buildings, and stomping her way through the farm was a robot. She looked just like you, Ma." Longneck sent me over to speak to the robot, but I couldn't understand anything she said. So I just followed her through the farm and around a corner. And then I saw something I never expected. Plants. Bright, colorful plants. I didn't understand how plants could live in such cold weather, but then I saw that they were actually inside a building. I learned later that the building was called a greenhouse, and it had clear walls made of something called glass. The robot pressed a button on the wall, and the door slid open, and warm air came rushing out. I hadn't felt warm in so long that I just had to follow her inside. Ma, it was like summer in there. The air was warm and sweet and sticky. There were rows and rows of different plants. The robot didn't pay attention to me, so I wandered around the greenhouse nibbling on leaves and drinking from puddles. Then I heard a scratchy voice behind me. I were younger, I would have killed you by now. I spun around. There was an old cat. She walked on stiff legs, and her fur was gray and clumpy. The cat's name was Snooks, and she didn't even seem very nice. But then she saw the other geese out in the cold, with their faces pressed against the glass, and she told me how to open the door. You can rest here, said Snooks, as the flock hurried in, but stay out of sight. The humans aren't that friendly here. Okay, mountain lions, we are about halfway through chapter 63, and I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause because I want to get you set up for tomorrow, and I'm going to give some of the story away because I don't want anyone to be nervous as we continue reading. So tomorrow, when we read, we're going to find out that something happened to Longneck, and it has to do with that human. They said the humans aren't that nice. We know that humans can sometimes be hunters. So thinking about that with the geese and not being nice humans, there's going to be a bad human who's not going to treat Longneck well, and that's going to make for not the most lovely end to this chapter. But it's a reality, so we want to just make sure we acknowledge it and know that it is a story. All is okay. All right, guys, I'll post your reading response. Thanks for listening today. See you soon.